Good morning and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We are on Wednesday, March 25th, and today's episode we're going to be talking about what broadband providers are doing in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Grateful for the two guests that we have today, which I'll be introducing in just a moment. First, I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've been speaking about in previous episodes. We started this less than 2 weeks ago on March 13th, 2 days after the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. And it's just been important for broadband providers and broadband advocates to be able to gather and talk about how broadband can serve as a solution, or at least ameliorate some of the issues with the pandemic. For example, we discussed higher education and how distance learning is become de facto the only way that people are able to get schooling right now. We've talked about teleworking, how more and more people like myself are working from their houses, their homes. And also we've talked about some of the measures that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has done and can do to make sure people are connected at this time. On one of our early shows, we actually had FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, who talked about the Keep America Connected pledge that FCC Chairman Ajit Pai had put out actually on the 13th of March, Friday, and 100 so providers signed up immediately. That number more than doubled soon thereafter. And I understand from just yesterday, more than 500 providers have agreed to abide by this pledge, which is in essence that one, they're not going to disconnect people during the next 60 days. Two, they're not going to charge late fees for bills that aren't paid in these 60 days. And three, that they're going to encourage and open up Wi-Fi hotspots for connectivity for people who maybe didn't have broadband connectivity. Now, in some of the other sessions we've had on Broadband Breakfast Live Online, we've had some people who've criticized that that's not enough. There needs to be greater connectivity, lift bandwidth caps, for instance, more changes to the Lifeline program so that schools, for example, aren't constrained in being able to make sure their Wi-Fi signals are left on at night. That's actually been an issue. And that was raised on one of our webcasts. And actually, the FCC just 2 days ago provided clarification that that is permitted under Lifeline rules. So we're grateful for that. Today's show, we're going to be talking a little bit about what providers can do to go beyond even those provisions. And very, very pleased to have with us two guests, Brett Glass, who is the owner of Lariat.net, a wireless internet service provider in Laramie, Wyoming. And we also have Joseph Grinnell, and Joseph is the president of the Eastern Oregon Telecom, an electric co-op, as I understand it, that has provided broadband. And so we're going to hear from both of them about how they're reacting to this moment. And we're going to start with Brett. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about Lariat, where you are, what your service consists of, and some of the specific things you've done to address the coronavirus pandemic. So, Brett, go ahead, please.
Okay, Drew, thank you for having me. Lariat, the WISP which I run, a wireless ISP, was the world's first wireless ISP. We've been running continuously since 1992, and we were originally founded to bring connectivity to rural areas. Now we're being challenged to bring still more, and we're trying to rise to the challenge. To give you an idea of where we're located, we're in Laramie, Wyoming, which is in the southeast corner of the state. Now, Wyoming is a very unpopulous state. We have only 500,000 people in the entire state, just 500,000, and our average population density is about 5 people per square mile, which makes providing broadband rather challenging at times. That lack of population density has contributed to a delay. I don't know whether this is fortunate or not, but a delay in the coronavirus reaching us. We've had time to plan, we've had time to think, but we also have a lot of very ruggedly independent people who believe they don't have to do much about the virus, and they're gradually coming to their senses and realizing, yes, they have to. And gradually institutions and individuals are beginning to do the right thing. The school district has shut down classes, which means that suddenly people have on their hands, all of their children to try to homeschool. The University of Wyoming, which has its main campus, its only campus in this town, has shut down the dormitories and has put its classes entirely online, and that's creating a great demand. Some of the students have gone home, but some of them have apartments off campus, and they're renting them. That's where they need to live. Some of them have no other choice as to where to live. We need to make sure that they have connectivity. We need to make sure that that things are not overwhelmed. We have first responders and emergency services on our network that need to be handled. And the university itself, now that it's gone to online classes, all of their faculty members who are on our network suddenly need more bandwidth to have online conferences, to teach remotely. It's suddenly been a huge rush of demand, and again, we're rising to meet the challenge. Now, we have always done more for our customers than the FCC has challenged us to do, or than its pledge dictates. We've never cut people off immediately for not paying a bill. We've always given them a little bit more bandwidth than they've paid for, just to make sure they always have enough. We're always, if you go down the list, we're always exceeding already the elements of that pledge. But the question is now how to best handle the crisis. You see that I'm dressed in my work clothes. I'm going to be going out this afternoon to put a family online, a rural family with several kids. And they need to homeschool, and they also need just not to go stir crazy with all the kids suddenly in the house. We're going to be making sure that we get them online. We're going to be wearing gloves. We're going to be making sure that they clear people out of the area and open the windows to try to dilute any virus that may have gathered in the air. And this goes both ways. We don't want to get the virus because then we're out of our technicians are out of commission. But we also don't want to spread the virus if anyone is infected and doesn't know it yet. And so we're taking all of those precautions. We're trying to work under more difficult conditions and still provide everybody with everything they need. Also, and I mentioned this to Drew prior to our session today, we're also looking at providing a public hotspot. A lot of people, unfortunately, who are financially disadvantaged don't have a good way to get broadband at home, and their cell phones may or may not be adequate to the task. So they have been taking advantage of places like the library, which is now closed, or other public hotspots, which are now turned off. What we're going to be doing is we have a building downtown where our offices are. We're going to be focusing a Wi-Fi hotspot down on the street and allowing people to access it from their cars where they're safely isolated from other people who are doing the same. So that if they really needed to drive somewhere to get broadband, and we'd love to get it to them in their homes, but they may just need to drive somewhere as they did before, we'll make sure that they have a way to do that too. So we're doing everything we can. It's difficult because we're experiencing a bandwidth crunch, and FCC licenses haven't come through, supplies haven't come through, increased broadband from our backbone provider hasn't come through. But we're working on all of this at the same time and trying to get people what they need.
Awesome. So, Brett, I actually, when you sent us this item and we published the item about your free service to people who were affected by or victims of coronavirus, that was before Wyoming even had a case. Now, of course, you do have a case, but could you just talk specifically about this notion of going beyond Keep America Connected pledge? And I gather that that's what you're doing, right? I mean, you're not just committing to, and I'm not sure if you signed the pledge, Brett, so I don't know if you've committed to these things yet, but you're also kind of offering free hotspots that you didn't have before. Is that correct? Can you clarify that, Brett?
Yes. Again, we're offering this free hotspot right in the center of downtown, which is the best place to do that. And right downtown is a ghost town. There's plenty of parking. We're doing that. Everything that we have that's normally public accessible with a password, we're going ahead and making publicly accessible. And we have also ordered up more bandwidth, which we hope we will get. Right now, our supplier is also hobbled by everybody working from home. We hope we get this soon to give every one of our customers a free upgrade. They're all going to be getting about 20 to 30% more bandwidth. And we are also looking at trying to establish a peering arrangement with the state government and the local university, which has just put everything online, so that instead of our packets having to go through overburdened internet exchange points, people who need to get to those online classes have a direct route to doing so, and all the packets will travel faster.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about this later, but before I turn to Joseph, can you just speak about how traffic has changed over the past 2 weeks on your network? How much more bandwidth are you experiencing? Is it coming in different patterns than you had previously expected? Give us your take as an engineering person yourself in what you're seeing over these 2 weeks.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen a huge increase in activity. A lot of it recreational. People the people who are sequestering themselves are going a little bit stir crazy, and so we're seeing a tremendous amount of traffic on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, all of the streaming video services that are more recreational, which presents an interesting problem because obviously we want to prioritize the stuff which is essential. But we're also seeing a tremendous amount of remote desktop as people log into their offices at home, and so we're seeing a lot of that during the day. We're seeing a lot of video conferencing. Zoom is getting a tremendous amount of traffic from us, and we're trying to find a way to optimize that. They seem to be one of the better online conferencing systems, and it's the one that the university uses. So we're seeing a flattening of the curve. We're not getting a big peak in the evening. It's now high all day long, and I would say our consumption is now up about 25%. And probably is going to go up still more. That's the reason why we're ordering in the bandwidth and giving everybody more.
Great, awesome, very much. Let's turn to Joe. Tell us a little bit about your community in, I guess it's Hermiston, Oregon, and what kind of service Eastern Oregon Telecom has been offering as you kind of then segue into how your service has been impacted by the coronavirus.
Drew, thanks for having me this morning. So we don't just serve the city of Hermiston. We actually serve a large portion of north central Oregon, both sides of the Columbia River over into Washington State, all the way over into the Hermiston region, which is central eastern northern part of the state. So our footprint's probably about 4,000 square miles, maybe a little bit bigger. And we both, we use fiber to the home, we use DSL, we use cable modem service, and we have a large fixed wireless footprint like Brett does. And so we go from population centers like the city of Hermiston is one of our larger population centers, all the way down to very, very small communities and rural and frontier areas of northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington. In that whole footprint, with all of our customers, we've done similar to what the FCC asked us to do, where if you have a problem paying, we're not cutting you off, we're not charging late fees. I didn't have data caps to begin with, so we haven't had to remove data caps. In answer to your question for Brett, I just checked our bandwidth consumption's up about 30%. And it's flattened out a little bit. It's not as flat as maybe Brett is experiencing. We still see it fall off in the late evenings, but we've got more bandwidth than folks can use right now. And so we've got multiple 10 gig circuits back to the different exchanges in Washington and Oregon. So we don't have to worry about that, and our customers are benefiting from the fact that we were scalable before all of this happened. In addition to thinking about how we could help people, the first thing is we're trying to keep doing business as usual, which has gotten more difficult with the stay-at-home orders both in Washington and Oregon. We're considered an essential utility, and so we don't have to stop doing business, but we're trying to be wise in how we do business. And so we're still doing installations. We've modified that, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about that here in a minute. But we're still doing a lot of construction. We've got construction crews right now trying to finish a fiber to the home build in a small town called Athena, and it's a wheat farming community. And those folks, before we got there, all they really had was very, very slow DSL. And so yesterday we installed City Hall free of charge just to get them to where they could conduct business for the city virtually and not have to worry about social distancing and bringing people together in meetings. But now they can actually do that virtually.
Let me get you to repeat that. Are you saying you hadn't had this town or community did not have broadband, period, or they did not have broadband through you and they switched over to you?
They had first generation DSL, so ADSL. The speeds that they were experiencing were somewhere in the 3 megabit per second range. Now the City Hall has a synchronous 200 megabit circuit from us. And so, you could argue whether or not 3 megabits broadband,
whether it was broadband or not,
probably not terribly functional. And so continuing to do installations, continuing to do construction is one of the biggest efforts that we're making right now to try and answer the problem that people have. In addition, we serve, for instance, the Umatilla County Fairgrounds, and it's a 70-acre fairground in north of Hermiston. And during Fair Week, we have a large wireless umbrella that we turn on. There's a lot of fiber on that footprint as well, but we turn on the wireless umbrella for the Fair Week. That's turned on now, and so people can just go park in the large parking lots in the fair and use the Wi-Fi if they need to. They remain socially distant because they're in cars. It's like the old drive-in movie theater where you're separated from each other. And so we're doing that as well. And so recognizing that if we're gonna get through this in a positive way, people are going to need to continue to do business. They're going to need to continue to do their education. They're going to need to continue to be connected with their friends and family. They're going to need access to healthcare without having to physically go into a clinic. And the internet gives them all of those. And that's why Brett and I do what we do. I think just listening to him, that's we're trying to fill that gap. So on the other end of this, we still have an economy that's running. It may have to spin back up again, but without internet service providers out there continuing to do what we're collectively doing, I don't know that we get through this well on the other
end. Yeah. Well, awesome. Broadband Breakfast started 12 years ago as a monthly gathering of people in Washington, D.C. Recently we've done remote events and I should say virtual events like this. And I'm proud to announce this is the first event where all of our participants, including the moderator, are west of the Rocky Mountains, right? Because I'm out in Utah right now, Brett's in Wyoming, and Joe, you're up in Oregon. But we do have a national audience. We're grateful to our listeners. Please feel free to tweet us at hashtag broadband or through one of the comment streams if you've got questions. I want to turn a little bit to some of the specifics of the coronavirus and what it's exposing, perhaps the bad choice of words, in regards to the digital divide, right? What are your respective experiences with who doesn't have broadband in Laramie? What are your experiences with who doesn't have broadband in the greater Hermiston area, Joe? And what are the specific things that you've tried to do kind of previously to this crisis, but now particular, in addition to the great work you're doing there, Brett, in putting this free hotspot out. But let me turn to you, Brett, first to talk about the digital divide as you experienced it in Laramie.
Well, in Laramie, we have the people who are economically disadvantaged mainly seem to rely on their smartphones for a semblance of broadband, or in tethering them if they need to get to a computer. Get a computer connected to the net. And this works if you've got individual access, if you just need to get to some basic things. But the problem there are two problems. If suddenly your whole family needs it, which is when you run out of data, you exceed your data allowance. And the other is that, well, you have high latencies and not very high speeds. All of the hype over 5G is really just hype. The fact of the matter is that people don't have adequate connections through their cell phones, and they won't even after the supposed 5G stuff is installed. So people are suddenly saying, well, I now need a fixed connection that the whole household can use. So we're getting calls from people, and they are not asking us for 25 megabits per second. which a lot of people claim is the minimum for broadband. They're saying, what is the minimum that I can use to get by? What is the minimum I can use just to stream a class or stream Netflix? And so the number one, oddly enough, what most people are doing rather than going for the maximum is saying, can I just get your lowest rate? And we're giving them the lowest rate which they can use to stream video, which happens to be 2 megabits per second to get adequate speeds, and that seems to be enough for a lot of them. But we can get it for them at $30 a month, which is which is a minimal impact on their household finances, especially when they may have less work or even have been turned out of work. So
talk to me a little bit about that calculation, Brett. I mean, why do you offer a package as low as 2 megabits per second? And I mean, honestly interested in your genuine answer. Is it because of constrained capacity? I do suspect you have data caps, right? And talk about what you're doing with those right now.
Okay.
But specifically, why 2 megabits? Is that still a viable option for your customers?
It is. I say, well, okay, if you take a look at the H.264 standard for streaming video, you can get at least 720p and maybe even higher resolutions and use only about between 3/4 of a megabit and 1 megabit per second. So 2 megabits per second is perfectly workable for somebody who needs to stream video for work or for education or even recreationally for Netflix, as long as they're not using high resolution. We wanted to offer a package around that because, again, most of the time when we get someone calling us, the most common question is, what is the least bandwidth I can buy? What is the cheapest package I can get that will let me do these things? And so what we're doing is we're trying to respond to demand. Now, bandwidth is very expensive here. We pay about 4 to 5 times as much to in a remote rural county to reach the internet backbone per megabit per second as somebody who's in an urban area. And we do the best we can with that. We try to give people the best possible deal and buy it for them at the lowest possible cost. But we're locked into contracts which stretch back several years, so even decreases in backbone bandwidth don't reach us immediately on account of that. And we're not going to be able to conquer the distance except by paying to. So again, what we're doing is we're trying to balance the economics and give people what they need. Now, again, the people who get those 2 megabit plans, because we have a direct connection to the backbone in Denver, directly to the peering points, that goes farther than 2 megabits from the cable company. It's the equivalent of several megabits from the cable company because the latency is extremely low. We can ping Google, our packets reach Google in 3 milliseconds. And so that's tremendously better than many of the broadband services out there. And so what we might lose if people are really demanding quantity, we make up for in quality. And again, this is a way of trying to provide better things. The other thing is the FCC hasn't provided us with a lot of spectrum for the last mile. We're using unlicensed spectrum to reach our customers, and there isn't a lot there. One of the things the FCC really could be doing right now is opening up 5.9 to 6 gigahertz right now. To public use. Right now they have an NPRM, but they haven't granted the spectrum yet. They should probably grant that right now, because as long as we're able to get our equipment to use it, that would aid with that crunch. But right now, we're trying to meet the demand with what we have, and that can be a challenge.
Well, perhaps we'll come back to spectrum a little bit later this hour. But Brett, let me just come back to the data caps question. And you mentioned the 2 megabits. You've argued for that, and I hear you. What are your other plans? What's your higher bandwidth level plans that you offer? And are you doing anything with your caps right now because of coronavirus, or are you still putting them in place?
Okay, we do not have data caps. We never have. We've never had a cap on the amount of data that the people can download. Our expenses are tied to the number of megabits per second, the amount of bandwidth that we have. And we pass that right along. We're very customer friendly. We pass that right along, and we don't impose any extra restrictions. So there are no data caps at all. What we do have is we have to allocate the bandwidth according to our costs. And so what you do have is a guarantee. And the other, by the way, this is another policy we have. We give everybody a guaranteed minimum, which is the amount of bandwidth that we know we can allocate to them for sure. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We let them burst over that, and we will give them more if we have it, but they always are guaranteed a minimum. This is different from a lot of ISPs where they specify some up to number, a maximum, and we don't do business that way. We give them a minimum that they can rely on having, and that way they know with that 2 megabits they will always have 2 megabits, as opposed to the 25 megabit plan that shrinks to below 2 megabits when it gets busy.
Okay, let's get Joe into this conversation. Joe, tell us a little bit about some of the technology choices you make use of. You discussed how you have symmetrical capacity, and you also discussed that you do have people served on a WISP facility there. So tell us just a little bit about that and about the packages and choices that you find people using and how those have changed in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you know, I hear what Brett's saying, and I don't want to lose sight of the bandwidth transport costs from the exchange, and I'm going to hit that first just so I don't forget it.
Please do, yeah.
If you buy bandwidth at the exchange in Portland, we can get it there for about a penny a megabit per second. If I buy it here, so to get it from Portland here, it's $2.65 a megabit. If I'm in John Day, which is a town that's about 2 hours south of here, it's $10 a megabit to the exchange. And so a gigabit of traffic in Portland is $10. A gigabit of traffic in Hermiston is $2,600. A gigabit of traffic in John Day is $10,000 for a gigabit. And so this transport cost issue is a singularly massive, significant barrier to getting bandwidth needs met in rural communities.
Huge issue. Brett, what just on that scale that he laid out there, $10, $2,600, and $10,000. What are you paying per megabit?
We're paying between 2 and 3. So we're kind of in the middle of $2 and $3 per megabit per second per month. So we're kind of in the middle of that. We get extremely high quality because of the way we do it. We have microwave links out to fiber, which runs directly to the internet hubs in Denver. So we pay dearly for that, but at least we get very good quality. So again, the idea is to maximize quality because the quantity is out of reach financially.
Okay, let's go back to Joseph to continue on this point about transport costs.
Yeah. So to be clear, he's about what he's paying. What Brett is paying is about what we're paying here in Hermiston. So we're $2.65 a meg. There's 1,000 megabits in a gig, so you multiply that by 1,000. $10 a meg in John Day. It's $10,000 a month for a gig of traffic because it's 1,000 megabits. And so I don't know how to solve that problem, but I've had conversations with members of Congress and the FCC about if we want to level the playing field for broadband access in rural markets, this is one of the things we have to figure out. How do we make it equally as cheap to gain access to the larger internet, whether you're at an exchange or you're in a rural market? And those costs, I don't know how you get to the point where you're providing a gigabit to the home in John Day affordably. I mean, if just the bandwidth's $10,000 a month, I don't know how you do that. So in our area, we to answer your question about the types of
service, continue. Then we'll come back to this other question.
I want to come back to that. We're seeing the different. We're not seeing people take the cheaper, and we haven't for a while. The lower price. And we don't offer anything that slow, even on our fixed wireless. But now there seems to be a greater awareness over the last several years. Specifically now, there's a greater awareness of how critical broadband access is to businesses and families. And so we've seen this gradual transition, which now has spiked, to higher bandwidth packages. And so in Weston, Athena, and Adams, the 3 communities where we're building fiber right now, the only thing we're offering is that 100, 200 meg synchronous service. And as soon as I solve my transport problem back to our central office in Pendleton from that location, we're going to offer a gigabit synchronous service. So we're to the point where we're trying we're trying to meet and exceed all of their needs. And by the way, that 200 meg package, synchronous package in Athena is $59.95 a month.
Brett, you wanted to weigh in on this point
Yes,
again?
I did, because there are three components to broadband service. You know, there's your backbone bandwidth, there's your middle mile, there's really your connection to the internet, your backbone connection, and then there's what you do internally to manage things, and then there's the last mile. They sometimes call that connection to the backbone the middle mile. And the middle mile, well, the FCC had a proceeding which it called its special access proceeding, where it had the opportunity to get some control over the middle mile and its costs, and also possibly to regulate them to make sure you weren't being gouged by a monopoly provider. The FCC at the time declined to regulate any of that, and it may be time to reconsider that decision in light of what's going on.
So let's talk just another 2 or 3 minutes on this policies for middle mile access. Are there ways or tools that you have access to in Oregon or you have access to in Wyoming for being able to get these costs down? Joe first. What are your thoughts on policy solutions to this issue?
Well, one of the most impactful and currently available options, and Brett talked about this, is peering. And so if you have a presence in the exchange, and we connect to 2 different exchanges. We connect to the Portland exchange, it's called the PIDIC, and then we connect also to the Washington exchange in Seattle. It's called the SIX. It's in the Westin building. And if you can peer in the exchange, peering says, for those who are not in this business, peering says, all of those folks who are connecting together, because the internet is not a big single network, it's all of these thousands of networks that connect together. And where we all connect together are in these exchanges. And so that's where everything talks to itself, and everybody talks to each other. In exchanges, there are peering groups where people get together and they say, look, Eastern Oregon Telecom will carry your traffic, Brett, for free over our network if you agree to carry our traffic over your network for free. It's called peering. And so it significantly reduces the cost of getting the data to and from the end user. And so peering is the singular biggest impact. That still doesn't change the problem of getting from the exchange out to here. So even though I'm peering with Netflix in the exchange, and so the traffic at the exchange is still free, getting from the exchange out to Hermiston, 155 miles to the east, now that's where that cost comes in, that transport cost, getting from point A to point B. And that's the bandwidth cost from the exchange out here. When we start talking about how the FCC or Congress could help us with that, finding a way to level that playing field. So whether you're at the exchange at a peering point, or you're in Hermiston, or you're in Laramie, Wyoming, or wherever, if you're paying substantively the same for the transport, for the actual connection to the internet, then people in Portland and Seattle and Washington, D.C., who are getting a gigabit for $70 a month, and the company that is providing that is making enough money to continue to invest in the network, we could do the same thing out here. And that's the bigger challenge. Now, we can overcome that to some degree in rural markets if there is a way to pool our buying power. And this is one of the things we're working on in Eastern Oregon, and this is as much from a cost savings perspective as it is a resiliency perspective in case of a Cascadia earthquake that takes out the PIDIC building. We want to be able to bring in a redundant feed through Boise from Denver or from Salt Lake City to those exchanges from the east, so we have a tertiary redundant path from the east. If we lose the exchanges on the West Coast, we still have a way to connect. I can't afford to do that myself, but if all of us who are in this region, all the internet service providers, pitch in and we buy bandwidth and then we share that transport cost, we could figure out, I think, how to make that palatable for us. So I don't know, with the population density, the challenges that Brett had, I mean, they're similar to
Well, let's get Brett's reaction to that. Have you done anything like that?
We've looked into it. It's sometimes hard to get, especially institutions, to cooperate. If you have, for example, a university in your area and it's connected to Internet 2, well, that's strictly an academic network, and you can't peer with them to get to the exchange points because they're sort of off on their own separate little internet, which is sequestered from the rest. We've talked to competitors about it, but unfortunately, some of them act too much like competitors and don't want to cooperate. The local cable company absolutely refuses to sell us bandwidth or peer with us or do anything like that. So there are the issues are not engineering issues sometimes. Sometimes they're people issues.
Yeah. I also want to come back to some of the issues that both of you have talked about, and this has been extremely informative on some of the innards and the engineering and the background issues. But from the perspective of the consumer, the end user, let's talk about the technology choices that make the most sense. Now, Joseph, you mentioned you do both wired and wireless, and Brett, you're I guess all wireless, as I understand it.
We are 95% wireless. We have a little bit of fiber.
Okay, so do you have thoughts on? I mean, are you finding that you talked a lot about latency a little bit earlier on, Brett, and some of the problems that mobile broadband connections have in your experience with that? But you're not finding those on your own connections, your fixed wireless connections. Could you just talk a little bit about the trade-offs that consumers may get depending on the technologies that are deployed to them?
Yes, well, again, not all technologies are created equal, and there are a lot of misconceptions because a lot of people assume that our fixed wireless is going to have the same quality as mobile or even worse, satellite. The fact of the matter is that when you're using the sort of technology that we're using, we have single digits in milliseconds of latency, as opposed to the hundreds of milliseconds that you have on cell phones or the thousands that you may have going through satellite. But they group all wireless together. They don't understand the differences between the technologies. Our microwave links have sub-millisecond delays going back and forth. So unfortunately, when policymakers go out to make policy, they often don't understand those differences, and we try to educate them, and they unfortunately, some of them listen and some of them don't.
Right.
But we do our best to try to explain to them that fiber is not the be-all and end-all, and in fact is economically unwise when you have 5 people per square mile. It's really the best choice, and it's the best way to get it to people. So we need to get the word out that there's more to this than technologically and in terms of economics than they may realize.
Let's get Joseph's reactions to that point and talk about some of the choices you make in different parts of your network between fiber and wireless.
So our goal is to have wireless pushed out into the market as far as is financially wise to do. And
did you say wireless or wired?
Wired, fiber. So we apply a hybrid approach. I actually jointly wrote one of the early articles on building a hybrid network into rural markets, where you in the most densely populated portions of the network, you use a terrestrial based and hopefully fiber, and now our construction costs and materials costs are down to where we can affordably build fiber to the home in these smaller communities, as long as there's a population base. But to Brett's point, as you get out of town and that population density gets thinner and thinner, it is exponentially more difficult to provide a terrestrial or a fixed wired approach delivery of service to those folks. And so we in these small towns, we've got fiber. Outside of the small towns, we use fixed wireless as the density goes down. But to Brett's point, the fixed wireless, if it's well engineered and it's deployed properly, it's generally fiber fed. At least our towers are mostly fiber fed, or a microwave backhaul that goes back to a fiber endpoint. We're providing really robust fixed wireless connectivity in these less densely populated areas. And so I don't want to just rely on fixed wireless. My goal is to start in the dense populated areas with fiber or coaxial networks, and preferably fiber. It's lower maintenance, a higher bandwidth. And then as I as I answer these problems, just continue to push that fiber deeper and deeper into the market. I don't think we'll ever get all the way to the last every barn with fiber. I don't think that there's any business case to justify that. But you can push fiber deeper into the market over time. And so that's been our approach.
So let's just come back to the digital divide and the issue of access that becomes critical at this time. How do you approach this issue of universal access, or I mean, is it available to everyone in your territory? Both of you. We'll start with you, Joseph, on this question of what do you define your service area, and who is able to get access to what types of technology, and are you doing, and what special things you're doing right now in this time of crisis? Joe first.
So we're not a subsidized telecommunications carrier. We pay for everything ourselves. And so our business model does not rely on government subsidies. So the way that we approach the market is based on principle, not on a subsidy. And so if we can connect a customer, and that's one of the differentiators between us and the larger carriers, is we're flexible in finding solutions that will meet the customer's needs. As an example, even though there's a large natural gas fired power plant that is south of Hermiston, well outside of the city limits, not really close to anything else. They were fed with a multiple bonded T1s from the incumbent carrier who subsidized, and they were paying thousands of dollars a month for what amounted to be 4.5 megabit of internet. We were able to stand up a dedicated microwave, and they're getting a gigabit from us. Now, would an incumbent step outside of the box and engineer a single solution for them? No, but that's one of the things that we do. Can we serve everybody? No. Laramie is, I've been to Laramie. I actually was born in Wyoming, and there's not as many trees as is in parts of Montana and other parts of Wyoming and Laramie, but we do have, and we're like that. We're desert, we're large agriculture. But there are trees here as well, and there are basalt canyons, and sometimes we just can't get service to somebody. Because of that, we became a Viasat dealer, and so we're able to provide satellite as a last resort for customers that we can't serve any other way. And so we'll move heaven and earth to get service to somebody. We'll design some pretty crazy endpoint connections to make sure that people are well served. But there are some people we just can't get to, and that's just physics, sadly.
Brad, what are your observations on that, including the satellite piece there?
Yes. Well, and by the way, our phone is ringing off the hook because so many people are interested in getting broadband from us. So forgive me while I silence this just temporarily. I'll forward. It'll forward on. But in any case, we're doing all sorts of things. We very rarely have a no-go place, a situation where we get to a house and we say we just don't have any way to reach it. But if that ever happens, we immediately start looking for ways to relay signals to those people in the area. Again, like I said, I'm going to have to go soon because people are calling and asking us for broadband. But in any case, we will talk to a neighbor and see, who has a better view, and see if we can do that. We generally don't refer them to satellite.
Addressing the digital divide question, are there parts of your service area? I mean, what do you consider your market? And are you able to get it to everyone in that area?
Just about. Sometimes there is someone who just has a large tree or something between them and our access point, and then we do some clever engineering and try to work around it. I'm an electrical engineer. I've been working on wireless since the 1980s, and was involved in the work which actually led to the development of Wi-Fi. So we try to be as creative as we can and solve these problems at a minimal cost. But that's really all we can do. I've helped people to install. If we absolutely couldn't reach someone, I've helped them to install cell phone repeaters. So, okay, that may not be great service, but at least they have something there. We haven't ventured into satellite, but we do know the satellite installers in our area, and we can call them out and say, hey, this person needs satellite. Can you help them? That's about the best we can do. But frankly, the gaps are relatively few. The area we cover, which is published on the FCC's maps, and we update that all the time. We cover, I'm going to say 98% of the people there. And again, if there is someone we can't cover, it's either a logistical problem, an obstruction, or a landlord who won't let us install it, which unfortunately happens sometimes.
Right. Let me, I'll mute your mic for a second, and if you need to address that, you can. Joe, would you be able to address the question of not just access, but training and connections and making sure people have the tools they need to get online? What do you do in that space? And we had a big discussion about this, I believe 2 days ago on our broadcast. We had National Digital Inclusion Alliance and others talk about some of the ability to make sure those who are most vulnerable are not unconnected at this time in particular. I just wonder if you could speak to this issue. Our listeners and watchers are very interested in this question, particularly now.
Again, that one of the differentiators between small providers and large providers is smaller providers tend to be super engaged in the communities that they serve. And I'm going to use Weston as an example. Weston is adjacent to Athena, and those three communities, Weston, Adams, and Athena, have all agreed that as we roll out this great tool, it's not enough just to get the tool to people. People have to know how to use it. And it's like mailing a screwdriver to everybody in the world and saying, here you go, you got this great new tool. And people go, okay, some of them know what to do with it. Some of them use it great. Some of them go, I don't know what this thing does. And they put it in a drawer. The internet is no different. And so in these three communities, and this is one of the things that we're hoping to do in all of the communities that we serve, we're surveying every new install and saying, what do you know about the internet? How do you use the internet now? What would you like to be able to do with the internet? And then we're compiling all of those results. And we're going to, over the next year, do digital transformation training classes in person in those communities free of charge. And it may be that we help people learn how to create an e-commerce presence for their brick and mortar business, to expand their footprint virtually so that their business is more capable. It may be that we're teaching people just how to use social media to connect to friends and family over distance. You can't just assume just because somebody is young and grew up in technology that they know how to use the tool well. And so in not thinking about any particular subset of our society, but society as a whole, if we can help people realize the potential of this great equalizer that the internet is for our society. It doesn't care what color you are. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care. The internet doesn't care. It just says, I can do all of this for you. And so if we can help them realize that potential, then I feel like that we've answered that digital inclusion, that equity piece. Because then I'm not focused on just the elderly or just the poor. I'm helping everyone to recognize the potential that the internet creates for them in their lives.
Let's ask the same question of Brett. Could you speak to what efforts that Lariat.net does to facilitate digital inclusion? Besides just offering service, how do you make sure people are aware of it and able to get access to broadband tools?
Yes. Well, Lariat actually started as an internet users group way back in 1991, 1992. We used to hold seminars where we brought people in, and we actually at the public library would give people a 2-hour-long class on what the internet was and how to use it. And it's not as necessary these days. Most people seem to know that, often if they don't know what they do is they ask their kids. But we find that we still give people a lot of advice and help. When the very first thing we do when we're hooking up service for a customer is we go into their home and we ask them, let's see your setup. Let's see what you're doing with this. Is there anything you want it to do? Do you need it for something like, say, would you rather switch to digital telephony instead of paying $30 or $40 a month for a rural telephone line? Can we help you pay $5 a month for service from someone like Ooma? for example. So we're constantly coaching our customers, and we encourage them to call us 24/7 if they have a problem that we can solve for them, even if it's not really our problem. You can't call the electric company to have them fix your toaster. But if anyone calls us and
but you can call Lariat Net to fix your
Yes.
router, or
yes, but if people are having trouble with some technology they can't figure out, we will at least steer them in the right direction. And more these days, we know the devices that they're having trouble with and can help them with them.
let me just kind of underscore that the piece we had on your offer in March 10th of this year, Brett, mentioned that you were offering free internet service telehealth providers, helping those with the new coronavirus. Have you actually had any telehealth providers make use of that offer yet, Brett?
Right now, the entire state of Wyoming has had 30 diagnosed cases of the coronavirus, and none of them have been in our county, so they haven't been within our service area at all. However, if we need to deliver a tablet to somebody, which could be easily disinfected so that the healthcare provider does not have to risk becoming infected to communicate with someone, we'll be on the road in 5 minutes and do it.
Okay. And Joseph, any particular instances or stories on the ground that you've run into thus far in terms of the services that you're offering to customers in need right now because of the coronavirus?
Yes, I got a call last week from the Wasco County administrator in Wasco County. The city there is the city of the Dalles, and it's Google's got a big presence in the city of the Dalles. It's a wonderful community, and they were standing up a tri-county incident command system for response to the COVID outbreak in Oregon. And they couldn't figure out how to get phones and internet put into this armory to meet their needs, because they thought they were going to be able to need to scale to about a 50-seat phone center with internet and Wi-Fi. And so, and this is just one example. We just installed it for them, and so got them up and running within a few days of their request. They had all the phones that they need. They're scalable. They've got a system that they need. They've got secure Wi-Fi. They've got fiber into the building. Those are the kinds of things that, again, I don't know how you would get through the red tape to get to a large provider to get them to respond like that. But when you got the smaller providers who are engaged in the community, you just pick up the phone and call the president of the company, and the president of the company calls his guys and his gals, and they just make it happen. And I love that. And so, we're seeing that, the fairgrounds, the Wi-Fi there, City Hall in Athena, they called and said, we can't conduct business on the internet connection we've got. Can you help? And we just went and did it. And I love being a part of a community that reacts that way, and a community of providers and a community of citizens and employees who are engaged and want to be able to make that kind of a difference. And at the end of the day, okay, if we get paid, great. If we don't get paid, it doesn't matter. It's all going to shake out in the end.
And Joe, could you just clarify, does Eastern Oregon Telecom offer other services, or is it another subsidiary of yours that offers other utility type services?
No, we're also a phone company. So we've been in business 20 years, and we're a real phone company. So we switch our own telephony. We've got a Class 5, actually 2 Class 5 switches geographically separated for redundancy. So we do fixed Wi-Fi, or we do managed Wi-Fi. We do hosted PBX solutions. We do IT support for small and medium-sized businesses. We try to do more than just connect somebody to the internet. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the few minutes we have remaining, I do want to come back to some of the policy issues that Brett in particular touched upon earlier. Maybe you'd like to add to these, Joe. So what about spectrum, right? Brett, what are some of the issues that you face most pressingly on the spectrum front, and what policy solutions are necessary to alleviate them?
Well, okay. Right now, there's a lot of red tape involved in obtaining spectrum, and so we're forced onto the unlicensed bands, which are really a free-for-all. And unfortunately, we have interference from a lot of our competitors who are putting up equipment which tries to take over the whole band. Sometimes they'll talk to us about this, sometimes not. There's limited speed. It's the speed that you can give people is proportional to the amount of bandwidth you have, and right now we're running out of spectrum. So we're doing the best we can. We're shifting over to licensed spectrum, in some cases licensed links, but your licensed links are 10 times more expensive, and you need the FCC to grant you a license. Right now, we have one very important license for a 2 gigabit link, which has been at the FCC and also at NTIA and then back to the FCC for a for this 2 gigabit link that we need to establish in order to beef up our capacity. It's just sitting there. We don't know what's happened to it, but we cannot put up the link until we get that. We have other situations where there's other red tape in terms of being able to get things, and so basically, you know, as Henry David Thoreau famously said, you know, the government never benefited any enterprise but by the alacrity with which it got out of the way, and the more it can do to cut red tape or to provide us with resources that don't require red tape to get, and again, that the prime thing I think is right now that 5.9 to 6 gigahertz section of spectrum that they've proposed to allocate to us. That would help tremendously. And again, for the licensed links, we'd like to get better response times on that. And also again in terms of the middle mile, if there's things that they can do to make sure that we don't get gouged on
Right.
on access.
On access.
Those are the things those are the policy issues that are top of mind for us right now.
Brett, how important is the upcoming, and I don't believe there's been an announcement of any delay of any sort on the CBRS auction in June, as well as the discussions about C-band. Do you have questions or thoughts about spectrum issues in regards to those middle band pieces?
Well, yes, CBRS, we really were hoping for it to go through the way it was originally proposed, where we could bid on census tracts. Unfortunately, the FCC yielded to requests from the large mobile carriers to auction the spectrum by entire counties. We can afford to bid on our own county, but there are people in the adjacent county, right? We're at the edge, and there are people right over the county line who need our service, and we can't bid on the entire next county, which has double our population. The FCC could reconsider that, hopefully, and offer some smaller lots so that our ISP can afford to step in and serve those people.
Yeah. Well, Joe, we've got about 2 minutes remaining. Let's give you an opportunity to speak to some of these policy issues that Brett has teed up, and your observation about those, as well as any other policy questions.
Well, and thank you, Brett. You're dead on. I would second everything that he said. More available unlicensed spectrum, smaller auction blocks for geographically for licensed spectrum auctions. Those are all very important. You know, here's an interesting one that we haven't really talked about, but on fiber to anchor institutions, you know, E-rate money, which is part of the Universal Service Fund, will help fund 80 to 100% of a fiber build into an anchor institution in a high cost area. And this is one that kind of caught us and our congressman by surprise. As we were starting to look at building into Weston, Athena, and Adams, there's actually fiber into Weston to the school and to Athena to the school that was paid for by E-rate money. It was built using E-rate money. And when the owner of that fiber, who won and built that based on money or using money that was available through the E-rate program, found out that we were going to build fiber to the home in this technically unserved community, they refused to give us access because they said they didn't want to allow a competitor in. Our congressman said, in shock, how can that be? That was the intent of the program, not to just fund the anchor institutions fiber, but to pay for the middle mile fiber into the community so that the community as a whole could be served. There was no requirement in the rulemaking that says if it's funded by E-rate money, either you have to serve the whole community or you have to make the fiber available at market rates to a competitor within a reasonable amount of time. And so that was a big miss I think. So not just on the spectrum side, but on how we're managing federal dollars that are spent to build infrastructure into rural markets and our expectations of how that fiber or that other infrastructure is going to be made available over time. I think we've got a lot of work to do there.
Excellent, excellent. Did you want to reply to that, Brett?
Yes, I would second that. And I would also say that there's another problem related to that, which is that the CAF2 money, which is supposed to subsidize rural broadband, is being squandered on overbuilds of existing service, including ours. We are not a telephone company. And because we are not a telephone company, the FCC refuses to acknowledge our existence when considering where to allocate CAF2 money. As a result, it has actually funded 2 or 3 other companies to overbuild areas that we serve while neglecting other areas which actually need the money. The policymakers really need to consider how to allocate this money fairly in a way that doesn't waste it.
Well, we appreciate both of your time here. I want to just take a 10 seconds in closing, thanking everyone for watching. Thank you also to Brett Glass and Joe Fresnel for being on the ground in their respective locations. We at Broadband Breakfast provide news and analysis, and we also are doing this Broadband Breakfast live online on broadband and the coronavirus until the end of March. So every Monday through Friday from now until the end of March, we'll be here talking about some aspect. Tomorrow we'll be talking about K through 12 education and people, again, on the ground dealing with some of the distance learning issues that they're dealing with right now. So we hope you'll join us again, 12 noon Eastern time at broadbandbreakfast.com. I'm Drew Clark. Thanks for joining us today.